keynote speaker for today, Professor Francis Pope. Before I bring Professor Francis Pope, I'm going to tell you a bit about his work. Professor Francis Pope is a professor of atmospheric science at the University of Birmingham and an environmental scientist specializing in air pollution, climate change, and urban resilience. Trained as a physical chemist, he develops innovative tools to study atmospheric processes in their effects on human health and sustainable cities. He leads the A System Approach to Air Pollution ASAP East African project, tackling air quality challenges in Nairobi, Kampala, and Addis Ababa. A natural interdisciplinarian, Professor Pope integrates insights from the natural, medical, data, and social sciences to advance understanding of climate impacts and support resilient urban development. So thank you, Professor Francis Pope, for joining us today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Excellent. So so thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity to talk to you. Following on from David. And so David was talking about these themes of collaboration. So what I wanted to talk about today was the role of art-science collaborations for driving sustainability. And the idea behind this talk is, how do we motivate people to collaborate? And not just other scientists, not just other engineers, but how do we motivate other stakeholders to collaborate with us? So as highlighted, I'm Professor Francis Pope from the University of Birmingham, where I work in the School of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences, and I'm also affiliate member of Birmingham Institute for Sustainability and Climate Action. So most of my work's around air pollution and climate change. So I'll give just a quick overview of air pollution and human health. So exposure to air pollutants causes a range of adverse effects upon human health, and it's estimated that poor air quality leads to many millions of premature deaths per year, about 4 to 9 million premature deaths per year globally, depending on which estimate you believe. And many of these are in Africa, and I point out Africa because quite a few of the case studies I'll use today are based in Africa. So this means that air pollution is the leading environmental cause of morbidity, death globally. So, a really important problem, but one that isn't taken into account enough. So the mechanisms for air pollution, so obviously we breathe in poor quality air and that affects our respiratory system. Once we've got it into our lungs, it can get into our blood system, it can get into our cardiovascular system. We know that several common air pollutants are also carcinogenic, causing cancer. And also there's a growing body of evidence which shows that air pollution can affect our cognition and our mental health. I won't talk much more about this, but this was an article from a newspaper a few years ago, which I like in terms of the message it gives. So what it says is air pollution rots our brains. Is that why we don't do anything about it? Which I think is interesting. And if you're interested in this paper below here discusses some of our work on air pollution and cognition. Okay, so air pollution, there's various air pollutants out there, but the one that matters the most with respect to our health is this one called particulate matter air pollution. And those of you who know anything about air pollution will know this slide very well. This is a slide from the American EPA. So particulate matter, what we're interested in is typically particles which are less than 10 microns in size. And to give you a scale, the human hair is about 70 microns apart. So 10 microns is 1/7 of that. And then the other size we're interested in is PM 2.5, and this is particles less than 2.5 microns apart. And typically, the smaller the particle, the worse its effect on health. So yeah, I'll talk mainly about particulate matter air pollution going forward. So, but before we get that, we'll talk a little bit about Elinor Ostrom. So she won the Economics Nobel Prize in 2009, and her work was in economics, but her work was largely around thinking about common pool resources and environmental management. So how can you make environmental management work, in essence? So common pool resources, these are essentially things which are free to us, things like the air, like the water, but which we all use and we can all pollute. But it's difficult to work out how to pay for it. So anyway, so Ostrom highlighted that for for the environment, for successful environment management, there needs to be four conditions which hold for the successful management. So first is the environmental problem is visible. So we need to see what the problem is. And here the trouble with air pollution is it's largely invisible. Secondly, we need to know the cause and effect relationships between how we pollute and how that causes the pollution. We need to know that the problem is reversible. And finally, we need to have management of the environmental resource results in clear benefits to key constituencies. So we need to prove to people actually by managing this common resource or the air, this has benefits to people. Okay. So it might cost us something, but actually the benefits, even though it's going to cost us something, is a better, healthier life and hence a more productive, economically viable life subsequently. So the second bit of background we need for this talk is there's been this real revolution in low-cost sensors. I'll talk about air pollution sensors today, but I could equally talk about water sensors. I could talk about noise sensors and many things. So back when I was doing a PhD, air pollution sensors looked something like this, or air pollution machines looked something like this. They cost lots and lots of money. You know, maybe this was £500,000 worth of kit, maybe £1 million worth of kit. It was very accurate. It was very precise. It required expert workers to work on it. But the trouble was, because of it cost so much, because it needed this expert, it just didn't get used much. So maybe if we were lucky, the University of Birmingham would have one of these, maybe not. And maybe if we were lucky, the city of Birmingham might have one of these, but maybe not. And so over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been this real revolution in low-cost sensors, which now, you know, the size of a phone, they cost anywhere between £10, $10, up to thousands, but certainly a lot less than these. And this is a picture taken recently in Uganda. This is one of my research group members, Demetrius, working with the AirQuo team in Uganda at Makerere University. And then we were putting up these sensors, which cost about $1,000 each. So this project, in collaboration with GAP, the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, UK International Development, Makerere University and AirQuo. So now what we've set up is an air pollution sensor network to do source apportionment. I won't talk anything more about this, but essentially we've set up this diverse range of arrays all over Kampala for less than $10,000, where this just wasn't possible in the past. So these low-cost sensors have made a huge difference to what's possible. So what's the advantages of these low-cost sensors? So the advantages are they're cheap, both in terms of the capital costs, but also in the operating costs. So the people to use these don't have to be as skilled, and hence they don't cost as much. They're small in size and weight, and they've got low power requirements. So you can start to think of many new use cases. So there's lots of applications. We can get greater and spatial resolution, greater temporal and spatial resolution, as the previous example shows. We can start to do mobile devices. I'll show an example of that in a second. We can start to think about sacrificial devices. So I've worked with volcanologists, for example, and so when they're flying over volcanoes and they want to measure what's coming out the top of volcanoes, they don't want to drop £1 million instrument into the volcano, but if they drop £100 instrument into the volcano, it's not the end of the world. We can start to look at indoor monitoring with these big regulatory grade equipment. You just couldn't do indoor, they'd suck too much air out, and so you couldn't do it indoor. You can start combining with other devices, this Internet of Things idea, and so on and so forth. But really what I want to talk about today is this citizen science and art science opportunities. So just one more example, again from Uganda, and this is starting to get into citizen science, is the main way of traveling across Kampala in Uganda is via these motorcycle taxis, these boda bodas as they're known there. And so what we did was we instrumented up a couple of these taxis with these sensors, and as the drivers drove around the city, we could start to get a map of what air pollution looked across in the city. So we can see it starts to, we color it, the hotter the color, the more polluted it is, and we can put this on these air quality guidelines. So essentially we can say, where is it unhealthy for people? Where is it moderate? Where is it good for people, etc. And you can start to build up this map. And so this is one of the nice use cases of this. So already the low cost sensors, even if this is still science, we can start to see you can get outcomes which are much more interesting and easy for common people, common stakeholders to understand. Okay. So then we wanted to come up with a new project, which we called the Air of the Anthropocene project. And the idea behind this project was essentially, from a health perspective, we know the serious impacts of air pollution. We know it's the leading environmental risk factor. This picture here from our World in Data shows that in terms of disease burden by risk factor, if you combine indoor and outdoor air pollution globally, it's by far and away the highest risk factor, greater than high blood pressure, greater than smoking. This is for 2021. Okay. And the trouble is this, even though the scientists, some policymakers know this, this body of knowledge is rarely translated into the individual understanding and action um, on air quality. And so why is this? So even though the scientists know this well, why is this? So the trouble, I think, it comes down to various factors. So one trouble with it is just air pollution's all around us. And so people feel helpless about air pollution. You know, they've got other things to worry about. So it's that ubiquity of air pollution is the problem. Secondly, air pollution is largely invisible. And so people can't see it. Even though they know it's there, they don't see it. So they get on with their daily lives without really thinking about it. Thirdly, they lack individual agency. They feel like they can't do much about it. Even if I stop polluting, someone else will carry on polluting. So you've got this common tragedy of the commons type problem. And then, as I say, the other trouble is you've got low motivation to change. So we had this idea of two questions really. How do you make the invisible visible? And how do you make the ignored unignorable? Sorry, I just got someone click on my thing. So talking to my friend Robin Price, who I'll introduce later, not in person, but in his ideas, he talked to me about John Butler. So he has this famous quote which says, "Art changes people and people change the world." So how do we get people to really think about it? And this is where this art science idea comes in. So if you can create artwork which shows air pollution, then you get far more people engaged, far more than the scientists who will look at my papers, for example. So this is where this Air of the Anthropocene project came in. This is Robin here. And so what he did was he made these light paintings of air pollution, okay? So what he does is he's got the same sensors that I've been working on for over a decade. So all the scientific evidence, the calibration, making these things work properly, he's got that on his wrist. And then what he does is he uses this data to power this light strip, which shines light as a function of how much air pollution is. So the more air pollution is, the greater it flashes. Less air pollution is, the less it flashes. And then he creates these photographs, these long exposure photographs, which can show relatively as you go from place to place how much air pollution there is. So on the top left, we've got a picture of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. In the middle, we've got Port Talbot in Wales. So it's the famous steel works in the UK. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a children's playground in Delhi. And what you can see is we go from a relatively low pollution place in Ethiopia to a moderately polluted place in Wales to a very polluted place in India. So you can see this change by looking at these photographs. No scientific expertise needed. It's very easy to understand. And so here we go from making these photos to the next day, we've got a street event where we can show people what air pollution looks like as we move through the cities. This is a picture from Uganda from a few years ago. So we're not the first people to use this idea of light painting. So this is a reasonably famous artist, Picasso here. So here he's drawing a centaur, so the same idea. So it's a long exposure photograph. He's got a light in his hand. He's drawing something. And essentially what the photograph shows is either something really bright, what he's drawing with the light, or something which is really still, which you can see for a long time. So that's the idea, is you take a long photograph, if it's bright, it shows up, if it stays still, it shows up, and by combining those two things, you can show what the air pollution is. And so through this approach, Robin created a series of stark images, so you can show inter-country variations. This is in India. And this is two children's playgrounds, one in Palampur up in the foothills in the Himalayas. So relatively low pollution for India, still quite high, much above the WHO guidelines, about 8 times higher than the WHO guidelines. But if you compare this to a children's playground in Delhi, which is about over 10 times greater than over 100 times greater than the WHO guidelines, you can see within a country you can have huge differences in air pollution in a very simple way to portray this. If we look at outdoors versus indoors, we can look at how, again, I've shown this picture of Ethiopia before. So going from outdoors, relatively clean, and we go next door, very close to where this picture was taken, but we go into a canteen. This lady is cooking soup over an open fire. And then what you can see is lots more pollution in there. So again, we can think about this technique. It's almost like looking at the air with a microscope, so you can see how much pollution is in the air. So you can do this variation from outdoors to indoors. So not only can we make these images, we can then use these images to get people to think about air pollution. So this was in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. So we did a postcard and a poster campaign. So we got the images to provide that visual hook to give something interesting for people to think about. And then we can give them some facts about air pollution, but not just give them facts, also give them some hints and tips about how to reduce their exposure to air pollution. And then the most interesting thing for me, we asked them some questions to put on the postcard. So what causes air pollution? What can you do about it? And who should be in charge of doing something about it? So since we're in Ethiopia, we're in this beautiful Aramaic language here. And here's a picture of the posters. This is up in bus stops, again, getting people to think about air pollution as they go about their daily lives. And so the thing I thought was interesting about this project was that on these, looking about who people thought were in control of air pollution. And the idea was we'd send all these postcards. And I was expecting, if you've ever seen the Harry Potter films, and the president of Ethiopia would wake up one morning with 1,000 postcards on his in his letterbox telling him about air pollution. That was the idea. So anyway, if we return to Elinor Ostrom, so if you remember, I pointed out that she said there's these four conditions that should hold for us to be able to do something about the environment. So the first one is the environment problem is visible. As I said earlier, air pollution is largely invisible. And so the light painting technique makes air pollution visible. So that's a tick. We've done that. So the cause and effect relationships are understood. So I argue that viewers can clearly see how different sources of pollution, for example, traffic or industry, shape local air quality. Thereby the technique deepens public understanding of the environmental cause and effect. So tick on that one. So the problem needs to be reversible. So the technique in itself doesn't prove that air pollution is reversible, but it is reversible. If we stop polluting, the air quality improves. But what the light painting technique can be used to show is that the problem is reversible. And so you can do this in clear and dramatic ways. So you can show, if we measure on a street with lots of traffic, the air pollution is high. And if we go to a street next door, but with less traffic, we can see a big change in difference. And we can prove this by making the invisible visible. And finally, management of the environmental resources result in clear benefits to key constituencies. And so what the projects allowed us to do is engage citizens, from schools to policymakers, by turning data into compelling stories. And so the immediacy of the art acts as that powerful hook, which sparks curiosity and dialogue going forward. So as an academic, we should document stuff. And so this is the paper which documents this work. So what you can see is lots of people from all over the world helped us with this. People in Ethiopia, people in India, people in Birmingham and elsewhere. So if you're interested in that, I recommend you read that. It's quite a short paper, quite easy to read. But if we really want to get change, we're not going to get change through academic papers. Maybe I've had 10,000 people read this. But if we really want to get people to read it, we need to go wider than this. And so here we need stakeholder engagement. So the approach has really got excellent tool for reaching a wide range of stakeholders, from school children to seniors. So here's an example of school children in Kenya doing like a mobile version of it using augmented reality on their phone, but the same sort of idea. And then here's at the opposite end of the age spectrum. This is Robin here, and the artist in the pink shirt. But here he's doing a group with older citizens in Leiden in Netherlands. So it's an excellent way you can engage both children and adults very easily. Because you've got these beautiful images, because it's a kind of an interesting idea, you get wide media coverage. So we've had like front page splashes in places, national newspapers, popular science magazines, also art magazines, for example. So really wide media coverage. And so that really amplifies the message very nicely. And I think without the art science aspect of it, we wouldn't have got air pollution into the papers as easily. And then finally, we get wider stakeholder engagement. So, for example, again, because of its immediacy, because it's easy to understand, we've had places like UN Habitat engage with us to commission us to do work. So this against the street scene in Kampala in Uganda. So just to summarize now, so low-cost sensors have transformed how we understand our environment. There really has been this big revolution in how we measure the environment. So now we can make it possible to see the realities of pollution and sustainability in everyday life. But not only does it allow us to do more measurements, I really believe it's opened up new pathways for public engagement, uniting science, art, and community through shared curiosity and creativity. So through the area of the Anthropocene project, we used light paintings. There's lots of other things you could do. This was the approach we used. And our approach made the invisible visible, and we turned air pollution data into stories about our shared atmosphere. So the project's wide uptake by schools, communities, and policymakers has also helped air pollution impossible to ignore. So we've made the invisible visible, and we've made the ignored unignorable. And so I believe that this collaboration with artist Robin Price shows that when science meets art, data can inspire change, which achieves real world impact far beyond traditional research outputs. And as I said earlier, this work is far more impactful than any one of my graphs, any one of my research papers ever will be. And so with that, I'll just say thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, please do ask questions now, but if not, get in contact. And really a very special thanks to Robin Price. And if you're interested in this and his work, that's his website there, which is stuffwhatidid.com. And with that, I will finish. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Pope. That was very insightful. Just to read out a comment from the chats, someone said that your work has inspired. Said I was inspired by Professor Pope's work to do something in the area of environmental heats and immunity stress to vulnerable populations in Uganda. So I think that was a very inspiring work. Thank you so much. And I'm just gonna, while we wait for questions from the audience, I'm going to have some follow-up questions to some of the things that you talked about. And 1 second, I think we have a. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. I'll be taking questions from the audience. All right, so I'm not sure if this questions was directed, but somebody was asking, there's going to be a collaboration with some of the work that you do. What does it look like? Specifically for people that are in law, environmental law and policy, how can they get involved in the amazing work that you're doing?
So, I mean, always reach out. It's always great to have new collaborations, I think is the first thing to say. And then something I didn't talk about, but something that we've been very keen on is to open source all this project. So all the code, all the kit lists, etc., is all online and open source documentation for that. And that was with an eye both to making sure that this work, took on its life of its own. It wasn't just dictated to by me and Robin, but also, other people could take it and run with it. And then that was with a kind of a view on sustainability as well. And since this conference is about sustainability, maybe I should have mentioned this, but ultimately what we don't want is the situation where me and Robin fly to a different country, do a different project. What we want is for people to take the ideas and the expertise and run with it where they want to. And we've seen this starting to happen. So we've seen projects starting in Canada, we've seen projects starting in Leiden, we've seen projects starting elsewhere in the world where people have started to do their own version of this. And not just to replicate exactly what we've done, but to take the overarching ideas and do something different with it. And that's been really nice to see.
Thank you so much, Professor Pope. So you spoke beautifully about turning air pollution data into stories, making the invisible visible and the ignored unignorable, if I'm correct. So what were some of the most powerful reactions you saw when communities first saw their air made the hair made visible? Or some of the
people have a really visceral reaction. I think to art, people just get it right. The people just instinctively understand it. And that's really credit to Robin that he managed to make these pictures and this technique which people respond to so well. And that's the real strength, I think, of the art science collaboration is artists, by definition, are experts in communication, right? Where scientists, try to be experts in communication, but that isn't our primary focus often, even though maybe it should be more. So you see, and it was wonderful with the children. They found it really exciting. What we got them to do, and we've done this in a number of places now, but I showed the example from Kitui in Kenya. We got them to be their own air pollution investigators. So they built the kit and then they went around and looked for where was the air pollution high. And the interesting thing there was sometimes the air pollution wasn't high where they thought it would be, and sometimes it was where it would be. So that, and I think that reinforces your understanding as well when you get to test your understanding and when you find out where you're right and where you're wrong, and then we learn through that process. So I think, in terms of future experts, hopefully we've caught these children at the right time to really spark their curiosity. But as I said as well, it's not just for young people. That example I showed from Leiden, kind of this older age community, and they were advocates for clean air. But again, they were looking for ways to get their communities to understand it, and maybe some of them without the scientific background, but again, they could understand clearly these images.
Wow, very nice. And so in terms of replicating, and especially communities in the global south, as places facing air quality challenges, how can they adapt the project you talk about, the hair of the Anthropocene approach, to their own cultural and environmental context?
Yeah, I mean, so take the ideas, run with it, copy it, share it, adapt
Yeah.
it, that would be fantastic. But reach out. We can certainly provide you with the open source documentation. We can point you in the direction of our write-ups to all of this. So we'll help you as much as we can in that regard. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's really exciting. I think people, when scientists should think about how do you explain your science to people who haven't got that scientific background? And I've said it already, but I'll say it again. I think art is a really helpful way to do that.
Mm, okay. So I think this is a more scientific question. Says, based on your experience, what strategies or interventions could be most effective in reducing urban air pollution in a country like Bangladesh?
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Aisha. I can see that. Um, so a country like Bangladesh, I've never been to Bangladesh, so I'm not expert on it. Um, but like most of South Asia, it will have multiple pollution sources, I'm sure. So there'll be just general urban pollution, which will come from transport, which will come from unclean cooking, biomass burning practices, probably. Um, there'll be brick kilns, I think, quite a problem in Bangladesh, if I understand correctly. So like local industries. So there's lots of sources, and this is one of the troubles with air pollution is it's not just one source of pollution. If there was just one source of pollution, it'd be relatively easy to rectify, or at least you'd know where to put all your efforts. Um, and so I mentioned briefly the project that we're doing in Uganda at the moment, which is in collaboration with GAP and Airquo. And what we're doing there is using these low cost sensors to do what we call low cost source apportionment. Um, and so, as I've said in the talk, there's been this real revolution in how you use low cost sensors to understand how much air pollution there is. And then the next step in the air quality management toolkit is you do this thing called source apportionment. So you've got this much air pollution. Does this much come from traffic? This much comes from industry, and this much comes from household burning, for example. Um, and I think there's great possibilities in doing source apportionment with low cost sensors because traditionally source apportionment, there's lots of ways of doing it, but again, it tends to be expensive. It uses expensive equipment. It uses expensive scientists, but I think we can hopefully have that same revolution in the sensing from low cost sensors, and we can have that same revolution in low cost source apportionment. So if you're interested in that, I can certainly share papers along that line. So I can put something in the chat in due course. But that's not necessarily an artistic side of it, but I think that's something you could also bring into the art side. And that's something Robin and I have talked a lot about in the past. We haven't actually done. So if someone wants to do this, it would be super interesting. Is not only show what the levels of pollution are in the painting, but also try and indicate somehow where the different pollution comes from, maybe by using a different color or a different symbol, etc. So there's lots of ways it could go.
Thank you so much, Professor Pop, for the truly insightful presentation. You've shown us today that how science can translate data and become art, and how something as technical as hair quality measurements can turn into a story that stirs emotions, that stirs awareness, and of course, collective action. And you've reminded us today that we must make the invisible visible and the ignored ignorable, which captures perfectly what this conference stands for, which is bridging disciplines, uniting creativity and science, and inspiring real world change. And on behalf of the Green Institute, BISCAR, and all participants from across the globe, thank you for demonstrating that knowledge breathes through heart and that it touches hearts as well as minds. And we're deeply grateful for your work and for your inspiration. And I would hope that we stay in touch with your work. And so thank you so much for honoring our invitation. Thank you.